Today we're going to talk about something that's been in the news a lot over the last couple of years, home title theft. And we're going to go through the details of it so you really understand what it is. I just by a twist of fate, this kind of became my area of expertise. I handled my first case of home title theft way back in 2003 when I was still a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County. And that was a decade before home title theft, Home Title Lock founded their company. You know, we used to call it deed fraud and various other things, but home title theft really, I think, captures the spirit of what this crime is. So just briefly, though, these cases, once I started handling one, more started coming to me. The detectives who investigated these cases brought more to me. And then when I went out into private practice, those were the types of cases that came to me because of my background. People sought me out for that. So, you know, as a result of that, you know, I think I can confidently say that I have handled more of these cases and represented more victims than any other attorney in the country. You know, I'm also involved in the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators, which is the leading international organization for people who investigate fraud. And I'm a co-chair of the Mortgage Fraud Task Force, which a big component of mortgage fraud is home title theft or deed fraud. So let's just talk briefly about what home title theft is. There's this sort of mystique out there that it's some kind of unique crime, some kind of new thing out there, but it really isn't. Home title theft is just a form of identity theft. It's where the homeowner's identity is used on a forged deed to transfer ownership or to make it look like ownership has been transferred to another person. The person's identity was stolen for that purpose. And that's really what identity theft is, generally. It's when your identity is used for some unlawful purpose without your authorization. And in this case, it's being used to transfer ownership of property you own. Also built into this is forgery, forged documents, forged signatures, forged notary stamps, forged seals. Filing of fault. Most states have a crime statute for the filing of fraudulent documents. Again, that's part of this crime of home title theft. And lastly, mortgage fraud. Mortgage fraud is a broad term for anybody who is lying to a lender to get them to provide a loan that they wouldn't provide if they knew the truth. I use that word lying because lies, what this is all about, lying to get something you're not entitled to. In this case, in home title theft, they're lying to get ownership of property that they're not entitled to. Let me just give you a quick example. And I like to start with this one because it just shows you how insidious this crime is. A year and a half ago, I got a call from an elderly woman who had been evicted from her home. The backstory is some bad guys, at that point she didn't yet know who it was, some bad guys had forged foreclosure documents to make it look like her house had been sold at a foreclosure sale. And they filed those with the county. In California, we call it a trustee's deed upon sale. You might call it a foreclosure deed. But they filed this trustee's deed upon sale to make it look to the world as if a lender had foreclosed on her house. But she didn't know that happened. The bad guys then filed an eviction lawsuit against her. We call that an unlawful detainer lawsuit in California. So they filed an eviction lawsuit against her. And the first she knew about any of this going on was when she was served with the papers for that lawsuit. So here's this poor woman who had lived in her home for 25 years. All of a sudden, she's being evicted from her home. It took her a while to sort of get her mind around what was happening. I mean, I think often people's first reaction is, no, this isn't real, and they just kind of toss it to the side. This couldn't be real. How could this can't be, I own this house. How can I be evicted? She eventually went to a lawyer. Lawyers are expensive, though. And she didn't have a lot of income to hire a good lawyer, so she hired a new lawyer, a young lawyer, who didn't have a lot of experience, who totally blew it in the eviction lawsuit. And unfortunately, the bad guys got an eviction judgment against her. And she called me after she had been evicted, after the sheriffs had actually come out and evicted her from her own home. She's in really deep at this point legally. If she can hire a lawyer, a good lawyer, he's going to have to do he or she's going to have to do a lot of digging to get out of this hole, because first they're going to have to unwind that eviction lawsuit. And they're going to have to convince the court that these were fraudulent foreclosure documents and that she shouldn't have been evicted. And it gets very complicated. I say without hesitation that home title theft is the worst kind of identity theft. If somebody steals your credit card or whatnot and uses your credit card, your bank gives you, cancels that number and gives you a new card the next day. But the kind of damage caused by this crime is on a whole other level. Why do crooks do it? Because it is easy. I'm going to go through a few examples to show you how easily they can do this. This is a fake notary stamp that I bought online for $14 and had delivered to my home 3 days later. Mine says Joe Q. Fraudster, and I'll pass it around. You can take a look at it. It says from the great state of confusion on the seal. But there was nothing stopping me from putting any one of your names on there. Nothing stopped me from doing that. I could have created a seal out of thin air and started doing that. Or I could just make it up. It doesn't have to be a particular person, because most counties, probably virtually every county, doesn't have a good way to verify that it's a real seal when they receive that document. They don't have a way to do that. What you see here on the screen right now, this is from a real case a couple of years ago in Miami, Florida. Elderly woman who had inherited this valuable land, suddenly found that she didn't own the property anymore. More often than not, when this happens to somebody, they assume the notary was involved. In my experience, and I've been handling these cases for 20 years, the notary is almost never involved. Sometimes, very rare cases. I think a notary was just prosecuted in Georgia for being involved in a scam like this, but it's very rare. Sometimes you have a notary who maybe just was sloppy, but even that's pretty rare. More often, the notary is just skipped, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. And they're skipped by various kinds of fraud, and the people have ways to get around the notary. What does it take to commit this crime? A forged document. That's it. A forged document submitted to the county recorder's office. There is no easier way for a single bad guy, fraudster, crook, criminal, to steal so much money without needing co-conspirators and accomplices. There's no better, no easier way for them to do it, and they can make so much money. This is a case I handled a few years ago in Southern California. The homeowner lived in Northern California and had inherited her childhood home in Venice Beach, California, and had been planning to fix it up and sell it, but she was older and time just kind of got away from her, and she never did. And one day she got a call from her old neighbor that she grew up next to and said, you're finally fixing up that house, huh? Good to see it. She said, nope, not doing anything there. So she delved into it, and what it turned out was the criminals here, they posed as her in front of a notary with a fake ID, apparently reasonable quality. The notary, according to law enforcement in this case, was totally innocent. Took the ID, verified their identity, and the fraudsters sold her house to a legitimate flipping company, to a company that seeks out good deals, fixes them up, and then resells them at a profit. So, fortunately, she was able to get on this early enough and stop the whole process. As soon as she contacted the flipping company, they stopped doing the work to sort of limit the expenses. But it did take 2 years. The whole process took 2 years to get her house back. So there are a couple things from this that I want to talk about this case that I want to talk to you about. First, just the amount of money involved. So in this case, they sold it to the flipping company for $650,000. So the bad guy walked off with $650,000, which was just a fraction of the value of the true value of the house. And the way they were able to do that is, the way they sort of set the price is they looked for a price that the flipping company would be able to borrow, because they wanted this to happen quickly. And they needed to be able to borrow it from a hard money lender. Can somebody tell me what hard money is? Anybody? Put your hand up. Anybody? Back there. Private money. That's exactly right. As compared to a bank, conventional lender, hard money, investors will pool their money together, and they'll have a broker or some central entity that invests that money as loans. And the hard money interest rates are much higher than conventional interest rates, and they tend to be short-term things. Builders will use it, flipping companies will use it. It'll tend to be short-term loans. The key here, though, is they do very little due diligence before they lend the money. For conventional loans, there's all sorts of hoops that you have to go through, all sorts of paperwork, all sorts of advice, all sorts of checks and balances. But with hard money, the hard money lender typically just wants to know how much equity is in the property. And typically they will lend up to about 65% of the value of the property, because they know if everything goes bad, they can foreclose and they'll at least get their money back. And they'll often agree to very short escrows. And so it makes it really, even though it's a legitimate business model, it also facilitates the goals of the fraudsters. So in this case, the fraudster was able to run off with a lot of money very quickly and disappear into the wind. The money went into a fraudulent Wells Fargo account and out the same day, and then it was just gone. At the end of the day, who was on the hook here? So the flipping company borrowed $650,000 to buy this property. They put some money into the property, not a lot, but some money into fixing it up. They had a lender who lent them the money, and then there was the true homeowner of the property. Who do you think was on the hook at the end of the day for this loss? Yes, the lender's title company. That hard money lender, fortunately for themselves, required that the borrower obtain a title insurance policy. So at the end of the day, it was the lender who lost out. And the estimates are that title companies actually pay out somewhere between $200 and $600 million per year in claims related to title fraud. Just to summarize, it's fast money. A single actor can commit this crime. And that's important to them, because the more people they involved as accomplices or as co-conspirators, the more people who can screw up, right? Who can do something wrong or can go to the police. Any property owner can be a victim of home title theft. People ask me all the time, actually, well, what if I have the property in a trust? Or what if I encumber it with a fake mortgage so it doesn't look like there's any equity? It doesn't matter. That just changes the type of document the bad guy has to record with the county. You know, if it's encumbered with a mortgage, so the fraudster just files a document that looks like the mortgage was paid off, right? Or files a foreclosure deed like that first example I gave you. It doesn't really matter. Now, there are certain primary targets, no doubt about it. And there are certain states where this is more prevalent. California, my state. Florida. New York. Parts of Pennsylvania. Parts of Texas. And that has, I think, to do a lot with property value. The more valuable the property is, the more money the fraudster can suck out of it using some sort of hard money loan, right? Or if they put tenants in there, the higher the rents are that they can collect from the tenants. So they're going to really target those higher value homes if possible, but it really can happen anywhere. And I was told by an insider that there is an epidemic of title theft of vacant land in Hawaii right now. A lot of this property is owned by Canadians, and somebody somewhere around the world is impersonating those Canadians and stealing title to those properties in order to flip it. Vacant homes, and vacant homes are important because the bad guy wants to get in and get out quickly before anybody notices. And if they can grab the mail while they're there, they do it. And so vacant homes often are situations where people aren't paying attention except maybe once a month or every few months or whatnot. Poorly maintained homes, elderly victims. That's a whole other topic about why elderly people are targets of crimes. But there are a lot of reasons. And so they are a disproportionate share of the victims of this crime. It is a relatively new crime because if you think about it, for hundreds of years, notaries have successfully prevented this crime, prevented forged deeds and forged powers of attorney and other documents. Did you ever see that movie, Catch Me If You Can? Do you remember that scene where he was printing the money? He had a whole warehouse full of this really expensive, fancy printing equipment. Well, before about 25 years ago, you needed special equipment in order to print credible and believable forged documents. But now, literally every computer has the technology on it to create believable forged documents. When I first handled my first case 20 years ago, the fraudsters back then, they were still cutting and pasting. They would cut and paste their documents, and then they'd go down to Kinko's and try to make a really clean copy that didn't show the pasted edges on there. And they did a pretty good job of that. But now they don't even need to do that. You can create the entire thing from scratch, on your laptop or your desktop computer. And there are just so many resources available to them on the internet to enable them to do that. This guy was a victim himself. He participated in the scam, but not willingly. He didn't know he was participating in the scam. He unfortunately was approached by a very sophisticated, very experienced con artist in Los Angeles. A guy who had been committing various types of real estate scams for 40 years before he finally went to prison in 2019. And so, poor John Cardenas, I actually do feel badly for him. You might not when you hear what he did. But, I've dealt with so many victims of con artists, and I never judge them because that's what con artists do. They persuade people to do things that in hindsight they can't believe they did. And I truly believe that there's a con artist out there for all of us. Now, the con artist who can get you isn't necessarily the con artist who can get me. But, they don't need to get anybody. They just need to keep going down the road until they find somebody who takes their bait, right? So, anyway, poor John Cardenas fell under the sway of this con artist who said he works with people who are in foreclosure. And sometimes they just don't have time to get to a notary. So could you please pre-notarize 100 deeds for me? He did. He did. Oh boy. Yeah, well, John unfortunately didn't get prosecuted. The detective decided not to submit a crime report against him, but he did lose his notary license. Notaries are the guardians against home title theft. In a real estate transaction, there are 3 fraud prevention processes. There's the notarial process, there is escrow, and there is the appraiser. Appraiser, notary, escrow, appraiser. Appraiser ensures that a fair and true value is reached. A escrow, imagine if you had to handle a property transaction without the escrow. You can do it, but who does what first? The seller hands the deed or the buyer hands the money? It's like, okay, we'll do it at the same time, right? Right? I mean, it's a really important process to ensure that this can happen. The money can go into escrow when it's available. The deed can go into escrow when it's available, and then at closing, it's dispersed simultaneously. It's a really cool concept, if you ask me. But really, the most important person element of this anti-fraud trifecta is the notary. This may sound like an exaggeration, but it really isn't. Notaries are the guarantors that documents are authentic, that only the true seller can sell the property. And that is the foundation of the whole Western economy, the economies of Western countries. Knowing who owns property is the foundation of Western economies. The real estate industry just doesn't really understand how critical you are to all of their jobs. Without you, there would be no real estate industry. I don't have to tell you what's up on this screen, but your job is to verify who that signer is, that they really are the person who's entitled to sign that deed. And then your stamp, that stamp is so critical in enabling future viewers of that document to know and to trust that the real person, authorized person, signed that deed. I mean, it's such a critical step, and it worked well for hundreds of years. So let's talk about how crooks get around you. There are 3 basic ways: duping the notary, skipping the notary, and then undue influence. So the first one is, we've talked about one example, conning the notary. Poor Mr. Cardenas. He got conned into pre-notarizing those documents. We've also talked about examples of the fake ID. Skipping the notary, just flat out forging the documents. And that's easier to do in situations where there's hard money lenders. It's harder to do when there's a conventional lender involved because all the checks and balances they put into place. And then the last one is just undue influence. And this isn't really skipping the notary, but it's manipulating a person in power, manipulating a person who they take care of, perhaps a caregiver taking advantage of an elderly person to sign a deed or sign a power of attorney. It's not just elderly folks. It's often people who are in foreclosure, who are desperate. They don't want to lose their home, and the bad guys will come in and say, "Oh, I can help you. I can help you. I'll help you get a new loan. I'll help you negotiate with a lender. We'll do also, I can take care of you, no problem. Just relax." And he'll convince them to sign a deed transferring ownership. to somebody else. So people get wooed into trusting these bad guys. So a lot of the people who complain about like the company Home Title Lock, not my company, I don't get paid by them, not affiliated with them in any way, but Home Title Lock people complain, they say, this is not a problem because a forged deed doesn't mean anything. They're right in one way. Legally, a forged deed is void. It means nothing. But the victim still has to file a lawsuit and go into court and prove that. Anybody ever been involved in a lawsuit? This is a very expensive, painful, drawn-out process. I told you about my one client. It took 2 years to convince the title company that she wasn't involved and that they should pay up. During which time she couldn't refi or sell the house. She's just locked, in that position in time. So it's people who say, it's just void, it's not a big deal. It is. These are people who don't really understand what it means to go through a lawsuit, to get them, imagine all the stars align perfectly. It may cost only about $5,000 and may only take 4 to 6 months. Stars rarely line up that perfectly. That's, again, why I say this is the worst kind of identity theft, because to unwind it, you don't just call the credit card company and get a new credit card. You have to first understand what's happening, find a lawyer who knows how to handle this and believes you that you weren't part of this, and then you got to file a lawsuit, and they've got to serve the other side, and then you got to go through discovery and motions and all this sort of stuff, and then maybe at the very end, you're going to get your house back, but it's a very painful process. All right, title theft is growing more common, probably. And I say probably because there are no statistics. There is legislation right now in front of Congress that would require the FBI to start keeping statistics on this particular crime. We'll see if that goes through at some point. But nobody carves this out as a separate crime, carves it out from mortgage fraud or real estate fraud or identity theft. It's all just kind of gets mixed up in the mush there. But law enforcement in California has told me that organized crime has discovered this and is using it to fund their other criminal activities. So if organized crime is involved, it's just going to get worse. Anecdotal evidence from around the country of just the numbers in those counties where they are prosecuting it, the numbers are pretty shocking. And why do I say this? It will get worse before it gets better for 2 reasons. One, there is no simple solution. There's no let's just do this and solve it. 2, law enforcement is understaffed for this and always will be understaffed for fraud cases. Really, we tend to put most of our resources into the violent crimes and that kind of thing, and we do allocate resources to fraud crimes and white-collar crime and that type of thing. But detectives will tell you that these are labor-intensive cases. One detective did tell me that he could close 20 residential burglary cases in the same time it took him to close 1 fraud case. So it's just, there's a dynamic here that just makes it hard to ever have enough law enforcement focused on these kinds of crimes. And so the sad reality is that most people who commit these crimes won't even ever get investigated, won't get prosecuted. Now, those who do get prosecuted, they go to prison. But it's really a small number, a small percentage. Let's just talk about title insurance briefly. What do you think? Does title insurance cover this kind of crime? Title insurance protects you against fraud before you purchase the property. They guarantee that you're receiving clean title. Can you imagine if we didn't have title insurance? This is another cool thing we have here. A lot of countries don't have this. If we didn't have title insurance, when you wanted to buy a piece of property, you'd have to go down to the county recorder's office. You'd have to go through all those title documents, right, and try to figure out if it was clean title. Instead, we transfer that obligation to experts who do this every day, day in and day out. They review this. And if they agree that it's clean title, they will give you a policy. And if it turns out they were wrong, they will pay to fix the situation. That's for everything that happened before you bought the property. But what if 5 years down the road, 25 years down the road, somebody files fraudulent foreclosure documents against your property? The traditional title policy would not cover that. There is a policy out there called the homeowner's policy, which is very distinct from the owner's policy. It's not. But the homeowner's policy does cover these kinds of fraud that happen long after you buy the property. I tell you though, people in the title insurance industry, even though their companies offer this, they don't know about it. I don't know why. I have asked numerous people as I go to various conferences around the country if they've heard of it. No, they haven't heard of it. No, it only covers stuff before you buy it. No, I'm like, no, there's this policy out there. And the only reason I know about it is just by chance, I happen to meet the two attorneys who wrote the policy. But what is the solution? You. Notaries are the solution. And empowering notaries is what needs to happen. More money, more education, and high-tech tools. Some of those tools that you find in remote online notarization platforms can be brought out to the field with you to help you verify people's identity, to capture information about the transaction, that type of thing. You could have electronic identity verification out in the field. Make sure they are who they are. Also, just proving that that your smartphone, if it was on your smartphone would prove that a notary was actually present, right? If the county recorder's office or the title company wanted to verify that there was actually a notary present, there's a way to do that. And then secure online storage of the documents from the moment it's created. Not much later. Anytime there's a printed document that goes through multiple hands, there's a chance for forged documents. But you guys are there right when it's created. That's when it should be captured.